Good afternoon. My name is Conal Newland, and I'm the head of Living from Cushman Wakefield. And welcome to this afternoon's APREA session. And I'm delighted to welcome our two guests this afternoon. We have Mr. Kong Chee Min, who is the CEO of Centurion Corporation, and also Mr. Eugene Lim, who is the CEO of the Assembly Place. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
If I may kick off, Cushman Wakefield, we're currently carrying out an APAC-wide investor survey, looking at the living sectors, looking at current allocations to the living sectors and future allocations, capital allocations. And our research is showing that over 85% of the respondents are looking to increase allocations in the next 5 years. Starting with the bigger picture, what is it about the living sector in your appearance that is attracting investor interest, and which part of the investment case do you think is interesting and compelling, both in Singapore and in other countries around the region? Sorry, Chee Min, if we could start with you.
Okay, thank you for the question. Maybe I should start. I think for investors, we are seeing that they're increasingly looking for investment in the living sector as a spectrum of different asset class, not just only student accommodation that we do, but also there's a growing interest in other sectors, including workers' accommodation, which is quite unique in our parts of the world. The listing of the Centurion accommodation REIT, or we call it CAREIT, in SGX main board in September last year is a clear signal and demonstrates that institution appetite for living sector assets are quite strong. And CAREIT, for example, there are about 113 institution investors investing in the REIT. And in Singapore, the part of the investment case for us that we find that is most compelling is workers' accommodation. It has a long, I would say, strong local relevance, and Centurion has been a pioneer in this specialized accommodation sector since 2011, with a good track record of performance in this segment. And as we are listed, this information are also quite transparently given to the investment community. And clearly from that, they know that workers' accommodation has a higher yields, net margins compared to students, while student that we operate adds diversity and also long-term stability. So the combination of this is making also the living sector in the market looking at for these two asset class being very attractive. And I may also say that for workers' accommodation, this particular segment is also drawing large institution capital. A recent example is Bain Capital acquisition of every lodge worker accommodation in Singapore portfolio from Blackstone in 2025, and this is around 750 million, right?
Wow! So there's been quite a lot of focus and quite a lot of activity. Thank you. And Eugene, from your perspective, please.
I think I totally agree with what Mr. Kong has shared earlier. I think one of the reasons we see this 85% increase in interest in the living sector, one of it is the circular headwind, the circular tailwind. Migration to cities, whether it's internet, external, the generation of tech worker, the young aspect, their behavior has changed drastically compared to 30 years ago. So we saw a shift whereby the young people, when they come over, especially to a part in Singapore, when they come to stay, they want to form a bigger part of the community. So I think that's one of the reasons why the Assembly Place will also get ourselves listed in the SGX this year, January, where the general public, the institutional fund, believe in this segment called the co-living sector, that which we are able to attract the younger workforce who want to stay in this part of the asset class. I think the second part is also yield as well as skill. Unlike traditional residential, living provides operational leverage, recurring revenue, and predictable occupancy. Most of the expats who come to Singapore to work in a co-living environment, they do not merely just stay for 1 night, 2 nights, like a traditional hotel. They stay here for a longer period of time, dependent on the how many years of pass that they get, whether it's an EP or S pass. Some of them, they will stay here as long as 2 years, 3 years. So that gives certainty in terms of occupancy as well as stability, and that increased yield from institutional ESG alignment, affordability, wellness, and community, and all these density all check the boxes for the institutional fund to want to participate in the living sector space.
Thank you very much, Eugene. That's very interesting. Picking up on some of the themes that you've both talked about, with I think a big move towards rental accommodation. If we look at the Singaporean market, one of the other key drivers has been a big increase in international students. And if we have a look at the statistics, international students in Singapore have increased some 35% since 2019 and 42% since 35% since 2023 and 42% since 2019. And Eugene, you touched on the point that you see students living in co-living. One thing as an observation is we haven't as yet seen a proliferation of PBSA as such delivered in the Singaporean market. And I'd be curious to hear your thoughts in terms of whether there is the opportunity for growth in purpose-built student accommodation in the near future. Chee Min, would you like to kick off?
Okay, maybe this question is more relevant to Eugene, but maybe I can start by saying this, okay? We actually operate student accommodation in Singapore in the past, but we exited, I think, just immediately after COVID, 2022 or something like that, right? And we exited that. So prior to that, student accommodation demand, there is, but is not very strong, I would say. But I think it's only post-COVID, as you allude to the numbers, it's quite strong. But that being said, I think Singapore PBSA market is small compared relatively to other leading global educational destinations like even Australia or even the UK. And also the fact that the international students in here has a wider range of housing options, which include the public housing. And also quite a number of condominiums as well. But more importantly is that Singapore is very compact, safe, well connected with public transport for most students traveling to school, typically only around 30 minutes. And therefore, it does reduces the pressure for a need of a dedicated PBSA compared to other larger educational markets. And of course, I think the build costs and all that, I mean, the land cost in Singapore is not that cheap either. So getting, the feasy work, it may not necessarily be that easy for PBSA. Even the one that we operated in the past is not PBSA per se. It's actually a lease from the government for about 9-year period, and we operate during that 9-year period. The building itself, it is already there. We just need to do refurb, and we do that. But that perhaps why PBSA market in Singapore is relatively small. But that also means that it contributed to TAP's success, I think. But because part of the student, I mean, they would absorb under the co-living model. In any case, that being said, I mean, we are open to exploring opportunities in PBSA opportunities too, which is rare to come in Singapore. But obviously, everything is subject to financial feasibility.
Sure. Thank you very much. And Eugene, please share your thoughts.
Okay, it is true that the numbers of students who come to Singapore to study has increased drastically post-pandemic. I think at any point in time currently in Singapore, there's 90,000 student pass that's being issued in Singapore. So in Singapore itself, structurally, it is like what Chee Min has rightfully pointed out. Real estate in Singapore is expensive. And to really build everything from ground up to have a dedicated PBSA, it is not so straightforward. Sometimes you look at it, the number don't really quite stack up. So for the assembly place, we have got 2 assets that we run as a purpose-built student accommodation. And this asset, we do not tear down to redevelop. I think for PBSA to make it work in Singapore, it has to be a value-added asset. So we got 1 asset in Teluk Kurau. The building itself is around 40 over years. So we actually value add it. The structure remain. We do a lot of internal renovation, do a lot of hardscape, streetscape. That itself have give us around 426 bed, and we are happy to say that we're running around 94% to 95% occupancy. But it's also ready because there's an influx of students coming into Singapore. And Singapore, not all universities in Singapore have their own accommodation space. And I think that's one thing. Let's take a look at NUS. NUS has 12,000 beds, but a lot of them are catered for the local Singaporean, firstly. And secondly, the beds are really available only for an undergraduate program and the PhD student. So then what is going to happen to the master student? So there's a lack in terms of spaces for them. So we also begin to see an influx of ASEAN country students coming to Singapore, Chinese, we have a Burmese, we got the Thai, we got the Vietnamese, the Indonesian will come to Singapore to study. A lot of them study in the private university who do not have accommodation within their campuses. So that's how the assembly place, we managed to fill in that gap. And I think one of the very important thing why there's more and more students staying in co-living sector versus the public housing 10, 15 years ago is also because the behavior of our young people has changed over the years. 25, 30 years ago, any young people who come to Singapore to study, a lot of them, their parents work very hard to send their children to study. So to them, the priority is just study and there's no social life, there's no wellness involved. So to them, it's all about, as long as I have got the room for me to stay, I just need to study hard and go back to my country to find a job. But post-pandemic, the younger generation, they are more savvy. They are plugged within the social media connectivity. A lot of them, when they come to Singapore to study, they want to meet more people. So versus staying in the public housing, staying with the landlord, they want to stay in a co-living environment whereby they meet like-minded people and build meaningful friendship. So that's how we see the behavior of all these younger students coming to Singapore versus pre-COVID. And that has helped us in terms of the occupancy.
That's great. Thank you. And Chee Min, coming back to you, if you don't necessarily see a strong future for purpose-built student accommodation in Singapore, if you think about other asset classes under the living umbrella, where would you see potential growth across some of those other options in terms of providing housing?
Okay, I think for Singapore, quite clearly for workers' accommodation is the asset class that we lead. So it's also our specialization and our largest presence in the market. Currently, we have about in excess of 40,000 beds in total, just spread across in Singapore, East and West, even North. So, we are pioneer in this workers' accommodation since 2011, as I mentioned, and we have established brands, management platforms, Westlake accommodation in Singapore, and also in I would say in Malaysia too. And therefore, this is a sector that we will be concentrating and also is attractive by itself in the sense that for purpose-built worker accommodation is relatively short, particularly the quality ones, which we specialize in. Singapore, the demand in terms of, Singapore currently is in the construction upcycle, which lifted the demand for migrant workers and also, therefore, the need of a purpose-built worker accommodation. And furthermore, I think just to add, this sector is highly regulated by the government, and that's where the niche is. The compliance regulatory requirement is relatively high, and employers we are seeing that they are increasingly want to stay in compliant and professionally managed housing, particularly after post-pandemic. So in short, demand is high, supply is short. So this segment is something that we are well placed to serve. given the scale that we have and also track record in managing the quality workers accommodation in Singapore.
Thank you very much, Chee Min. And so workers accommodation is very much your pick, Eugene. In terms of the other sectors, can you please share your thoughts?
I think that the senior living will be something that's of interest. It's really because of the aging population, not only in some of the European country or in Korea. Singapore is also facing the same issue of the senior living. We are not having a high birth rate. And our statistics show that in year 2030, every 4 adults, there will be 1 senior. So I think the government knows of this, and I think that's the reason why there's a ramping up of hospital infrastructure and also getting on board as much foreign healthcare worker during this period of time to support the aging population. So then that's what can we do as an accommodation provider. So the SMA Place last year, we actually launched our first pilot intergeneration living, whereby level 1 is for our senior, level 2, 3, and 4 is for our international student. So why do we do this? I think internally in the assembly place, our management feels strongly that the government can only do certain part of the job. I think to take care of the senior, I think is society have to play a part as well. So we have international students, 90,000 of them constantly coming to Singapore. So then can we build an infrastructure whereby our international students, where they are studying in Singapore, can they also play a part, to help us to tackle this senior living? So we run a very interesting and successful campaign since last year. So we got around 15 Singaporean senior who stay with us. A lot of them, they are not married, they are single, they have retired. So they come on stay at level 1. Then we have 200 over international students. So what we do as operator, we create a very robust community event for the senior and the younger generation to mingle together. So we launched this event called the Story Circle, which we invite our senior to share with our young undergrad which industry are they in, during their working adult years. So a few of them were in banking and finance. So we got all our students who were in banking and finance to attend the talk. So we as operator, we become a moderator and interview our senior. So when that happened, I think that's when the magic happened. The senior will feel that, hey, I feel young again. I feel that I can contribute a lot more to the young people. And when the young people look at the senior, day in, day out, look at them and say that, look, these are potentially my parents. There's so much that I can learn from them. So we hope that for us, the SMA Place, we position ourselves more than just an accommodation provider, because I think that there's better accommodation provider that can do the hardware even better than us. So what we try to do is to provide that software and to really build, to be a placemaker, to be a community leader, whereby we can bring the 1+1 can come and become, can build really a robust community. So we feel that the senior living, coupled with the young people, the intergeneration living, if we execute it well, I think within the next 2-3 years, we can see a lot of interest in this space. Of course, it's still too early to say whether the institutional fund will want to believe in that space, because I think that will take probably another 2-3 years to see it come into fruition. Thank you.
Wow, it's really fascinating hearing about the intergenerational operations. It's something that I've become aware of recently. Chee Min, have you got any other comments in relation to what Eugene's just said?
Yes, it's very interesting that Eugene, probably this can happen in Asian countries or probably in Singapore, I think. Based upon what we manage student accommodation, whether it's Australia or even in UK, Conal will be able to comment as well, because students doesn't like to stay with working adults, or even you're talking about grandparents. I don't think they would like a student accommodation to have that kind of mix together. And adults would not like to stay with students anyway also. So therefore, this purpose-built student accommodation derives, whereby, they all come along. Of course, they have fun, not only just academic studies, and no friends altogether. And that's where the trend seems to be for PBSA. Of course, I do understand that nowadays, even for BTR, they are also attracting students as well. But it's not it's not because of the fact that they will like to attract students, but they have no choice but to attract students to a certain extent to get their building filled up. I believe that on a long-term basis, in terms of how they would be able to segment whether this is actually students or spread across all students, or only one stack of it is students and the other stack is actually adults.
Yeah.
It is really it's really something that is interesting to see.
Yeah, I think Eugene's final point was probably highlighted a really key point that, you know, operationally it's a it's a method that you are seeing deliver success and trading well. So the next step will be whether capital is keen to commit in terms of, you know, delivering purpose-built assets to to meet that subset. If I may move quickly on to focusing on operations, and you both run large operational platforms, businesses that have grown out of Singapore. Chee Min, first for you, you know, Centurion now operates across a number of different countries. You highlighted before, you know, some of the differences that we see in some of those countries from an operational perspective. Could you maybe share with us a few thoughts around some of the key differences you see operating in countries such as Australia compared to, say, the UK, also compared to, you know, how you see the business and the operations that you provide in your home base of Singapore?
Okay, that's a short question, but requires a long answer though. So in terms of asset class itself, we already see there are similarities and differences across markets and also across different asset classes. I think more importantly, the very distinct ones is actually the local regulatory requirements, and therefore that has to be, I would say, adapted to the local conditions, and therefore we can't scale or just lift and shift that part of it. That's a major difference between the across the markets. But even for the differences in terms of asset classes, like for example, student and workers, their needs are different. Like students, their parental care. Workers are different, even though both are living away from home, and their needs are different. And the kind of care for migrant workers, for that matter, in Singapore is different compared to the kind of care that we operate and manage for students. So students is a lot of tender loving care, I would say, even though they probably don't want because they think that they are adults. But we do need to operationally ensure that they are well equipped themselves in terms of knowledge to stay away from home, particularly like, for example, fire safety. When they are cooking themselves in the kitchen, this is the first time they do it, and fire hazards can happen. And we do a lot of things in terms of educating them in terms of how to handle a fire. We also, if there's a fire, and also to prevent certain things that they shouldn't do in order to avoid a fire in the kitchen. This is one aspect of the differences between student and workers. But of course, workers, both of them are, like, for example, stay away from home. For students, we probably pay a bit more attention in terms of bringing them to a new location, and also a new, because they're coming either from interstate, it's a new location. Even some of them are coming from foreign countries. So domestics or local students, we do need to have a good orientation program and welcoming program to them. So that is being customized specifically to different markets, and also different I would say local requirements and jurisdiction for them to comply with, also when they are staying in that particular country or that particular location. So what I must say that, of course, there are some similarities between the two, and therefore, operationally, there are some synergies. that we could leverage on for each and every one, apart from just only the local regulatory requirements. For whether students or workers or even across other countries, we take care of them holistically as a resident, not only just only on safety, mental well-being as well, and also curate necessary events and also training programs and programs that they love to I would say enjoy together with the community. It is something that we do. Of course, student accommodation, another model that is also different is that depending on where the country is, like for example, Australia and UK differences in the sense that in Australia, less off so that we are working with the university, but in UK, the engagement in the university is much more. I think the differences is purely because UK is a very matured market in terms of student accommodation. PBSA, I would say. For Australia, I would say they are less. I would say that they are not as matured. So the engagement with the universities are really different. There are some certifications in UK that we go for called ANUT, but obviously in Australia there's no such certification as yet. So there are these things that we need to adopt and adapt locally to make a difference. And I must say that while there are synergies in terms of our operational capability, but there are some fair amount of tweaks that we need to do going into different markets, even though it's the similar asset class.
Thank you. That's really interesting. And Eugene, from your perspective, we've sort of talked about the different asset classes that you operate. You obviously have a focus on co-living, PBSA, and the intergenerational accommodation provision as well across a number of different brands. From an operational perspective, can you please share with us, some of the similarities that you see between those subsets, and then also some of the differences?
Okay, so currently, the Assembly Place, we have got 8 brands across 5 living sector. So, of course, a lot of people will always ask me that, is it painful to have so many brands? The short answer is yes, because every brand will have its own marketing activation. But for us, I think it's important for us, to have these brands. The reason is because we are in the country like Singapore, which is highly regulated. So we do have a hotel, we do have a service apartment, we do have our co-living residential, we even help a Ministry of Health holdings to manage their healthcare accommodation. So when we build a brand, operationally, we always look at data. We always ask ourselves who our members are. Other than our intergeneration living, which we have around 15 seniors living with us, currently we got close to 3,500 keys across 103 locations. What is interesting is that 85% of our members are 34 years old and younger. So we look at this basket of data, then we ask ourselves whether they are a student who are 17 years old undergraduate, or whether they are 22 years old doing their master program, or 25 years old S-Pass or EP Pass holder working in Singapore. Then we look at them and say that how can the operator like us value add to them? I think running the company for the past 6 years, we always tell ourselves that operationally, we want to put our community first. So why do I say so, putting our community first? Because our some of our members are as young as 16, 17 years old. So when they stay in our purpose-built student accommodation called campus for 3 years. 3 years later, when they graduate, if they find a job in Singapore, their first paycheck may not be the highest, probably $4,500 to $5,000 Singapore dollar a month. And we want them to stay in my co-living space, a room without attached bath, as well as $1,200 per month. 3 years later, when they work hard, they got promoted, their paycheck increased to 8,000. They can upgrade to a more premium co-living space under my brand, which is a room with attached bath. So why do we have that? We hope that our members graduate from space to space with us until two things happen. So whether they stay in a student accommodation at $880 per bed to a premium co-living of $2,500 per room, they are still plugged within the same community. So we hope to journey with them until two things happen. One, they choose to become a Singapore citizen. They meet the love of their life and they say that, look, it's time for me to settle in Singapore, raise a family, I buy my first public housing in Singapore. Or second pointer is that they say that I have studied 3 years in Singapore, worked in Singapore for 5 years, total 8 years, it's time for me to go back to my country, Hong Kong, in China, to help in the family business. And when they come back to Singapore again to visit as a tourist, we hope that they stay in our boutique hotels because they are very familiar with us. So we hope as an operator, our playbook is always to try to create that stickiness within our community so we can play a part through their journey of their life when they are in Singapore. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. We're almost out of time. I'm just going to quickly, as the last question, put you both on the spot with a very fast question with fast response, hopefully. Chee Min, first of all, for you, over the next 5 years in Singapore, which of the living sectors do you think there'll be the most activity?
I think my answer is definitely workers' accommodation, because there's a great need for good worker accommodation in Singapore. And the worker accommodation in Singapore is also transiting and changing in terms of standards, and new ones will have to come out. And therefore, I must say that for growth-wise, in the next 5 years, I believe that workers' accommodation is my pick.
Thank you. And Eugene?
Okay, so for us, quick answer. We are in the business of the young people. So 34 years old and younger, that's our customer. So in Singapore, almost every year, there's around close to 400,000 of foreign workforce, including students that's 34 years old and younger. And this close to 400,000 already excluding the migrant worker as well as a domestic helper. So we feel that irrespective whether it's a PBSA or living sector, as long as a 34 years old and younger continue to come into Singapore, I think that's our target audience.
That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you both. That's been really insightful.